The National Park System, also known as the NPS, is the protected lands of the United States on the federal level. And although the National Park System charges an entrance fee, this fee is not nearly enough to afford operating costs. That is why NPS relies heavily on monetary allocations from Congress. So, however, the current budget only allows for day-to-day operations and does not afford the acquisition of new lands and major park improvements. This is according to the National Park Conservation Association in Support Increased National Park Funding, published in 2021. So this is why I'm proposing that more federal funding should be allocated to the National Park System. Today I'll be discussing the main problem with the current system of my ill. I will identify the responsibility of the blame of my issue, and I'll be verbalizing a possible course of action for a cure. And then we will weigh the costs and benefits of initiating the change I'm proposing. So now that I've outlined my argument, I will begin today by discussing the main problem with my ill. So without a larger budget, the NPS cannot grow and improve, as stated by Bertazzo in the article on conservation.org. The world's national parks are not as secure as we think, published in 2016. And without the growth and improvement of our wild protected lands, there is less space for our citizens to connect with nature and nature to thrive as our country continues to expand. So this problem is leaving millions of acres of land unprotected and open to development. This problem not only affects the citizens that are unable to escape daily life and return to nature, but is also inhibiting the growth of wildlife habitat and forests to offset carbon emissions. So now that we have discussed the ill, let's move on to discussing the blame. So for the issue we are discussing, structural blame will be placed on the federal government for not allocating adequate funds to the NPS. In addition to the lack of money allocated, funds that were intended to benefit the NPS are being siphoned to other purposes. And these purposes are not related to the parks at all. And according to the Conservation Fund in their article National Park Service, published in 2020, the money from the Land and Water Conservation Fund that was established by Congress to take profits from the extraction of offshore oil to directly support the park system with the royalties. As per the U.S. Department of the Interior in their article Land and Water Conservation Fund, published in 2019, this monetary park support was intended to encourage conservation of land and water in the process. However, a large portion of the profits from this fund are not making their way back into the park system. So since the blame has been discussed, we can now move on to talking about the cure for the issue at hand. The new system I'm proposing would allocate a larger budget and place a higher priority on acquisition of more land to be protected and maintained by the NPS. So the first step will be to acknowledge that there is a backlog of nearly 1.7 million acres of land that is currently available for acquisition at roughly a cost of $2 billion. So with current funding allocations from Congress, only less than 1% of this land can be acquired a year, as per NPS.gov in their article Land Acquisition Status, published in 2021. Some of the landowners of these prime tracts of land have waited decades to sell their national park boundary acreage to the NPS. Oftentimes they get tired of waiting and they just sell out to developers in the meantime. This cannot continue to happen. If developers continue to secure the land that should be part of the NPS, our ecosystem and natural resources will continue to face irreparable damage. So the next step after the big boost in funding is to acquire the backlogged land will be to operate the Land and Water Conservation Fund as it was intended to be operated. Allocate all royalties from the offshore drilling to boost the park systems and protect the land and water as it was established to do. With a larger yearly budget, the NPS can hire more employees to conserve and protect the land and wildlife. So lastly, I will discuss the cost versus the benefits of the change I am proposing. So the cost for the change is simply the cost itself. Money is needed to make this happen, and that is federal money at that. That means that money will have to be allocated to the national park system instead of possibly being allocated to another noteworthy need in our country. The benefit of this, however, is that our country can slowly start to heal from the damage we have done to it. Trees can grow and wildlife can prosper. Our citizens can connect with nature as we were intended to. Land can be acquired, maintained, and protected from development. The land and our natural resources would finally be made a priority. So now I'll conclude my argument. So in conclusion, it is my firm stance that more federal funding should be allocated to the national park system. So NMIL identified that with a larger budget, the national park system cannot grow and improve. I suggested the blame is on the federal government for not allocating enough funds to acquire the land that is backlogged or properly endow the NPS with all the royalties from the Land and Water Conservation Fund that was established to support the park system. For the cure, I propose that more funding will be allocated to allow for the total acquisition of the backlogged tracts of land before landowners sell to developers, and that the Land and Water Conservation Fund allow for appropriate annual funding to further improve and protect the parks. So I propose that a cost of this would be that the funds provided by the government would take away from funds for other important needs in our country. But the benefit would be protecting the land from further development and protecting our natural resources for our country. And with that, I will leave you with the words by Aldo Leopold. Conservation is a state of harmony between men and land.